The buzzards circled overhead as Corinna Whitmore clawed at the dry earth, her fingernails splitting against the rocky ground. 3 days without water had turned her lips to cracked leather, and the rope burns around her wrists had begun to fester. Jeremier had tied her to this mesquite tree 50 miles from nowhere, leaving her with nothing but his final words echoing in her mind. Should have thought twice before shaming me in front of the whole settlement. The sun beat down mercilessly on her auburn hair, now matted with dust and desperation. She'd stopped crying on the second day when the tears refused to come. Now she focused on the sound of hoofbeats growing closer, another hallucination, surely, like the mirages of cool water that had tormented her since dawn. But the hoofbeats were real. Through her swollen eyelids, she glimpsed a lone rider approaching on a paint horse, his long black hair flowing behind him like a war banner. A Comanche warrior, she realized with what little clarity remained. Death had found her at last, though not in the form she'd expected. The warrior dismounted with fluid grace, his moccasined feet silent on the hard-packed earth. He approached slowly, hands visible, speaking in gentle tones that sounded like water over stones. When he knelt beside her, she caught the scent of sage and leather, so different from Jeremier's perpetual stench of whiskey and unwashed wool. "Easy, little rabbit," he murmured in accented English, producing a knife that caught the sunlight. Corinna flinched, but instead of harm, he cut through her bonds with practiced precision. "I am Ayanna Nalnish. You are safe now." She tried to speak, to thank him, but only managed a harsh croak. Without hesitation, he lifted a water skin to her lips, supporting her head as she drank greedily. The cool liquid was salvation itself, flowing down her parched throat like liquid moonlight. "Slow," he cautioned, pulling the water away when she would have drained it. "Too much will make you sick." As her vision cleared, she studied her rescuer. He was perhaps 30 summers, with high cheekbones and eyes the color of obsidian. Scars marked his chest and arms, a warrior's decorations, but his touch remained gentle as he examined her wounds. "Your husband?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Corinna nodded weakly. "Left me to die." "Sad I said I brought shame on his name." Something dark flickered across Ayanna Nalnish's features. Among his people, a man who abandoned his wife to such a fate would be cast out in disgrace if he lived long enough for banishment. "Can you ride?" he asked, already lifting her from the ground with surprising tenderness. She weighed nothing in his strong arms, a broken bird he'd found in the wilderness. "I think so," she whispered, though her legs felt like water. He helped her onto his horse, settling behind her with easy familiarity. As they rode toward his camp in the distant hills, Corinna felt something she hadn't experienced in years of marriage to Jeremier's safety. This stranger, this supposed savage, had shown her more kindness in minutes than her own husband had in 3 years of matrimony. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold, and for the first time in days, Corinna Whitmore allowed herself to hope. The Comanche camp emerged from the twilight like something from a dream. Buffalo-hide tipis stood in neat rows along the creek bed, their surfaces painted with symbols that seemed to dance in the firelight. Women looked up from their evening tasks as Ayanna Nalnish rode through the camp with his strange burden, their expressions curious but not hostile. Corinna had expected whooping warriors and bloodthirsty savages, at least. That's what Jeremier and the other settlers always claimed about Indians. Instead, she found children playing with carved wooden toys while their mothers prepared the evening meal, the air filled with the comforting sense of roasting meat and sage smoke. "This is Taya Naeli," Ayanna Nalnish said, helping Corinna down beside a tipi where an elderly woman waited. "She is grandmother to us all. She will tend your wounds." The old woman, her silver hair braided with turquoise beads, spoke rapidly in Comanche. Her weathered hands were gentle as she examined Corinna's rope burns and sun-damaged skin. Though they shared no common language, kindness needed no translation. Over the following days, Corinna's strength slowly returned under Taya Naley's care. The grandmother fed her broths made from buffalo bone and prairie herbs, applied healing poultices to her wounds, and communicated through gestures and broken English she'd learned from traders. Ayana Nalnish visited each evening, teaching Corinna words in his language while she shared stories of her life before Jeremiah. She learned that his name meant eternal blossom, given to him after he survived a fever as a child that should have killed him. He was a respected warrior and skilled horse trainer, unmarried at 30 because, as he explained with quiet dignity, he had not yet found a woman who could match his spirit. "Why did you save me?" Corinna asked one evening as they sat by the creek, watching the stars emerge. He was silent for a long moment, skipping stones across the water's surface. "My mother died when I was young," he finally said. "White soldiers left her to die after they burned our village. A Mexican woman found her, nursed her back to health. Though she died 2 winters later from the lung sickness the white man's fire gave her." Corinna felt shame burn in her chest. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. You are not responsible for all white people, just as I am not responsible for all Comanche," he said simply. "But when I see suffering, I remember my mother. I remember Maria Santos, who showed kindness when she could have shown hatred." As weeks passed, Corinna found herself changing in ways that had nothing to do with her healing wounds. The constant fear that had marked her marriage to Jeremiah began to fade. Here, among people she'd been taught to consider savages, she discovered what it meant to be valued rather than merely tolerated. The women taught her to tan hides and weave baskets. The children included her in their games, giggling when she attempted their language. Most importantly, Ayana Nalnish treated her as an equal, seeking her opinions, sharing his thoughts, never raising his voice in anger or frustration. "In my village," she told him one evening, "women are property. First our fathers own us, then our husbands. We have no say in our own lives. Among my people, women choose their own paths," he replied. "A woman can leave her husband if he treats her poorly. She can become a warrior if her heart calls her to war, or a medicine woman if spirits guide her to healing. Why should the Creator make women strong if they are meant to be weak?" It was a revolutionary idea to Corinna, this notion that she might have choices, that she might be more than just a vessel for a man's needs and desires. One morning, she woke to find the camp stirring with unusual energy. Scouts had returned with troubling news. White soldiers were approaching, following the trail Ayana Nalnish had left when he rescued Corinna. "They come for you," Taya Naley said in her broken English, her ancient eyes sad but unsurprised. "White woman cannot stay with Indian people. Soldiers will not understand." The dust cloud on the horizon grew larger with each passing hour, and with it, Corinna's dread. She recognized the blue uniforms of the cavalry even at a distance, their regimental flags snapping in the prairie wind. Beside the soldiers rode a familiar figure that made her stomach clench with remembered fear. Jeremiah Whitmore, her legal husband, come to claim his property. "You must go," Ayana Nalnish said quietly, his hand resting on her shoulder as they watched the approaching party. "If they find you here willingly, they will use it as excuse to attack my people." Corinna's newly healed heart cracked like pottery dropped on stone. After 6 weeks among the Comanche, she had begun to believe in the possibility of a different life. The thought of returning to Jeremiah's brutality seemed worse than death itself. "I won't go back to him," she whispered fiercely. "I'd rather die first." "You will not die," he said with quiet certainty, "and you will not return to the man who left you for the buzzards." His obsidian eyes met hers, burning with determination. "But we must be clever. White man's law says you belong to your husband." "Yes? Then we must make their law work for us instead of against us." Before she could ask what he meant, Taya Naeli approached with a bundle of clothes, not Corinna's tattered dress, but traditional Comanche women's garments made of soft buckskin and decorated with intricate beadwork. "Quickly," the old woman urged. "Become who you truly are." With trembling fingers, Corinna donned the clothing that had been prepared for her, a beautifully crafted dress that fit her perfectly, as if made by someone who had studied her form with loving attention to detail. Moccasins replaced her worn boots, and Taya Naeli braided feathers and small bells into her auburn hair. "Remember," Ayana Nalnish said as the transformation completed, "you are not the woman who is left to die. That woman is gone. You are Corinna of the people now, and the people protect their own." The cavalry reached the camp just as the sun touched its zenith. 20 men in dusty blue uniforms led by a captain whose weathered face spoke of too many years on the frontier. Jeremiah rode beside him, his pale eyes scanning the camp with obvious disgust until they found Corinna. "There she is," he shouted, spurring his horse forward. "There's my wife. I told you these savages had taken her." Captain Morrison, a man whose reputation for fairness was known even among the Comanche, held up a restraining hand. "Easy, Whitmore. Let's hear what the lady has to say." Corinna stepped forward, her chin raised with newfound dignity. The woman, who had once cowered before Jeremiah's rage, was gone, replaced by someone who had learned her own worth among people who valued strength of spirit over submission. "I am not your wife," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the camp. "You forfeited that right when you tied me to a tree and left me to die." Jeremiah's face flushed red with anger. "She's been brainwashed by these heathens. Look at her dressed. Like a squaw. Captain, you have to make her come back where she belongs." "Actually," Captain Morrison said slowly, his experienced eyes taking in Corinna's transformed appearance and the protective stance of the warriors flanking her, "the law is quite specific about abandonment. A man who deliberately leaves his wife to die has legally dissolved the marriage bonds." "That's preposterous," Jeremiah sputtered. "She's still my property." "Women aren't property, Mr. Whitmore, even on the frontier." The captain's voice held a note of distaste. "And even if they were, a man can't abandon something and then claim it remains his." Ayana Nalnish stepped forward, his bearing proud and diplomatic. "Captain Morrison, I know you to be a man of honor. This woman was dying when I found her. The spirits guided me to save her life. She has chosen to remain with our people of her own free will. She's been captured." Jeremiah insisted desperately. "They're holding her against her will." Morrison looked directly at Corinna. "Ma'am, are you here by choice?" "I am," she replied without hesitation. "These people have shown me more kindness in 6 weeks than I received in 3 years of marriage. They've given me something I never had before, the freedom to choose my own path." The captain nodded slowly. "Then it appears the matter is settled. You're free to make your own decisions, Mrs." He paused, realizing she might no longer claim her married name. "Corinna of the people," she said firmly, using the name Ayana Nalnish had given her. Jeremiah's face twisted with rage at her words. "You can't do this. She's a white woman. She belongs with white people. Captain, you can't let her stay with these savages." "Mr. Whitmore," Captain Morrison said with barely contained disgust, "you left your wife tied to a tree to die. In my book, that makes you the savage here." He turned his horse toward his men. "Mount up, boys. We're done here." But Jeremiah wasn't finished. As the soldiers prepared to leave, he drew his pistol with desperate fury. "If I can't have her, nobody can." The shot cracked across the camp like thunder. Women screamed and pulled their children close while warriors reached for their weapons. But Ayana Nalnish had been watching Jeremiah carefully, reading the murderous intent in the man's pale eyes. He threw himself in front of Corinna as the gun fired, taking the bullet meant for her heart. The impact sent him staggering, crimson spreading across his chest like spilled war paint. Corinna caught him as he fell, her newly found peace shattered by the sight of his blood on her hands. "No!" she screamed, pressing her palms against the wound in a futile attempt to stem the bleeding. "Please, no." Captain Morrison's own weapon was out now, trained on Jeremiah with deadly precision. "Drop it, Whitmore. Drop it now." But Jeremiah's mind had snapped completely. He swung the gun toward Morrison, wild with desperate rage. "You're all against me, all of you." A warrior's arrow took him through the throat before he could fire again. Jeremiah Whitmore fell from his saddle and lay still in the dust, his cruel eyes finally empty of malice. Captain Morrison holstered his weapon and knelt beside the wounded warrior. His battlefield experience told him immediately that the wound was serious. The bullet had caught Ayanna Nalnish high in the chest, dangerously close to his heart. "We need to get him to the fort, surgeon," Morrison said grimly. "No," Taya Naeli said firmly, pushing through the crowd. "Our medicine woman will tend to him. White doctor does not understand Indian healing." For 3 days, Corinna never left Ayanna Nalnish's side. She helped Taya Naeli change his bandages, forced healing teas between his fevered lips, and whispered desperate prayers to both the Christian God and the Comanche spirits. The bullet had been removed, but infection threatened to claim what Jeremiah's hatred had failed to destroy. On the 4th morning, his fever broke. Corinna woke from an exhausted doze to find his dark eyes open and focused, though weak with pain. "Little rabbit," he whispered, his voice hoarse but wonderfully alive. "You are safe?" Tears streamed down her face as she took his hand. "I'm safe. You saved me again. I could not let him hurt you." Each word was an effort, but he forced them out. "You are too precious to lose." "Don't talk," she soothed, stroking his fevered brow. "Just rest. Get better." But he shook his head slightly. "Must tell you ... in case the spirits call me home." His fingers tightened weakly around hers. "I love you, Corinna of the people. From the moment I found you dying under that tree, you have been the song in my heart." Her tears fell. "Faster now. I love you too. That's why you have to fight this. You have to get better, because I can't imagine a life without you in it." Over the following weeks, as Ayanna Nalnish slowly recovered under the combined care of Corinna and Taya Naeli, their love deepened into something unshakable. The crisis had stripped away all pretense, leaving only truth between them. They had found in each other what neither had dared hope for, love that transcended the boundaries of race and culture. Captain Morrison visited several times during Ayanna Nalnish's recovery, officially to check on the wounded man's progress, but really because he'd been moved by what he'd witnessed. Here was proof that love could bridge any divide, that humanity was stronger than hatred. "The territory's changing," he told them during one visit. "More settlers coming in every day. And they're not all as reasonable as I try to be. You two might want to think about heading further west, where the land's still wild enough for people to mind their own business." 2 months later, as autumn painted the prairie in shades of gold and crimson, Ayanna Nalnish had recovered enough to ride short distances. The bullet scar on his chest would mark him forever, but Taya Naeli declared him strong enough for what he planned to do. Corinna found him by the creek one evening, gazing westward toward the distant mountains. The setting sun caught the copper highlights in her hair, now grown long enough to braid in the Comanche fashion. She had changed so much from the broken woman he'd found tied to that mesquite tree. Her back was straight with newfound pride, her green eyes bright with purpose rather than fear. "The grandmother says you spoke with the council today," she said, settling beside him on the grassy bank. He nodded, still looking toward the horizon. Captain Morrison was right. The white settlers grow more numerous each season, and many do not share his wisdom. Soon there will be no place for our people on these plains. Corinna felt her heart sink. She had found paradise among the Comanche, a place where she was valued for her spirit rather than seen as property. The thought of losing this haven filled her with dread. "Will you go with them when they move further west?" she asked quietly. Ayan Ananalnish turned to face her, his dark eyes reflecting the dying light. "That depends on you, little rabbit. The council has agreed to a plan, one that will take us far from the reach of hostile settlers, to a place where we can live as we choose." He reached into his medicine pouch and withdrew something that made her breath catch, a necklace of intricately worked silver and turquoise, beautiful beyond description. "Among my people, when a man wishes to join his life with a woman's, he must prove his worth through great deeds. I think nearly dying to protect you qualifies." Tears blurred her vision as he continued. "This was my mother's and her mother's before that. Will you wear it, Corinna of the people? Will you be my wife, in the eyes of the spirits and the law of the heart?" "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." As he fastened the necklace around her throat, she felt the last chains of her old life fall away. She was no longer Corinna Whitmore, abandoned wife and victim. She was Corinna of the people, beloved of a warrior, free to choose her own destiny. The wedding ceremony took place 3 days later under the light of the full moon. Captain Morrison, who had become an unlikely friend, attended as a witness, along with the entire tribe. Corinna wore a dress of white doeskin decorated with thousands of tiny bells that chimed like wind music with every movement. Ayan Ananalnish stood proud in his finest regalia, eagle feathers in his long hair and his grandfather's war paint adorning his face. Taya Naili performed the ceremony, speaking words in Comanche that seemed to call down blessings from the star-filled sky. As husband and wife, they drank from the same cup and shared food from the same bowl, symbols of the unity that would define their marriage. "May you be as constant as the North Star," the old woman blessed them, "and as enduring as the mountains. May your love be a light that guides others home." The celebration continued until dawn, filled with drumming and dancing, storytelling and laughter. For one perfect night, the troubles of the encroaching world fell away, leaving only joy and hope for the future. As the sun rose on their first day as married couple, Ayan Ananalnish and Corinna made their final preparations to leave with a small band of families who had chosen to seek their fortune in the distant mountains. They would establish a new community far from the conflicts of the expanding frontier, a place where love could flourish without fear of persecution. Captain Morrison came to see them off, his weathered face thoughtful. "You know, in all my years out here, I've seen a lot of ugly things. Men at their worst, doing terrible things to each other over land and pride and fear. But I've also seen something else, moments like this, when people choose love over hatred, hope over despair." He shook Ayan Ananalnish's hand with genuine respect. "You take care of her, son. And Mrs. Well, what should I call you now?" "Corinna." "Nalnish," she said with a smile that could have lit the entire prairie. "And thank you, Captain, for everything." The mountain valley they found 200 miles to the west seemed touched by the hand of the Creator himself. Pine-covered slopes rose on all sides, creating a natural fortress that could only be reached through a narrow canyon. A clear stream ran through the valley floor, fed by snowmelt and underground springs. Game was plentiful, the soil rich enough for gardens and the isolation complete. "Here," Ayan Ananalnish said as they crested the final ridge and looked down into their new home. "Here we can build something that has never existed before, a place where all people are judged by the content of their hearts rather than the color of their skin." The small band of 37 souls who had followed them included not just Comanche families, but a Mexican trader named Carlos who had married into the tribe, 2 escaped slaves seeking freedom, and even a German immigrant family whose wagon had broken down and who had been welcomed despite the language barrier. Corina threw herself into the work of building their new community with passion that surprised even her. She helped raise tipis and later log cabins as winter approached, tended the sick, taught English to those who wanted to learn it, and discovered she had a talent for diplomacy that proved invaluable when disputes arose. You would have made a fine chief, Ayana Nalnish told her one evening as they watched their neighbors work together on the community garden. The people look to you for wisdom. I look to you, she replied, taking his hand. We lead together, or we don't lead at all. Their first winter in the valley was harsh but hopeful. Huddled around fires while snow fell outside, the small community grew closer, sharing stories and skills, languages and traditions. The children played games that blended Comanche, Mexican, German, and American customs. The adults learned from each other's expertise, how to preserve meat the Comanche way, how to build chimneys like the Germans, how to work silver like Carlos's people. Spring brought new challenges and new arrivals. Word had spread somehow about their hidden valley, reaching the ears of other displaced people seeking a place to belong. A family of Cherokee who had escaped the Trail of Tears, Chinese railroad workers who had saved enough money to buy land, a widowed Irish woman with 3 children and nowhere else to go. Each new arrival brought skills and knowledge that strengthened their community. The Cherokee woman, Ayana, was an expert in herbal medicine who worked alongside Teanili to establish gardens of healing plants. The Chinese men, Li Wei and Jiang Ming, proved to be master engineers who designed an irrigation system that turned the valley floor into productive farmland. Margaret O'Brien, the Irish widow, had been a school teacher and began teaching all the children together, regardless of their backgrounds. By their second year, what had begun as a desperate flight from persecution had grown into something remarkable, a true community where diversity was strength rather than division. They had established trade relationships with friendly tribes in distant settlements, their crafts and produce becoming renowned for their quality. Corina's role in all this transformation couldn't be overstated. Her unique position, a white woman who had chosen to live among Indians, who had experienced both the cruelty and kindness that humans were capable of, made her a natural bridge between worlds. She negotiated trade agreements, settled disputes, and gradually earned the respect of even the most suspicious newcomers. But it was in her marriage to Ayana Nalnish that she found her greatest joy. Their love had deepened with each challenge overcome, each dream shared and achieved. They had learned to blend their different backgrounds into something new and beautiful, creating traditions that honored both their heritages while building something entirely their own. Do you ever regret it? Ayana Nalnish asked her one evening as they sat on their cabin's porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. Giving up the world you were born to? Corina considered the question seriously, as she always did his thoughtful inquiries. I gave up a world that never truly wanted me, she said finally. A world that saw me as property to be owned rather than a person to be cherished. What we've built here, this is what I was meant for. You are what I was meant for. He pulled her closer, marveling as he did every day that this remarkable woman had chosen to share her life with his. And you are my destiny, little rabbit. The spirits guided me to you not just to save your life, but to discover my own purpose. 5 years after their arrival in the valley, Corina stood at the edge of their thriving settlement, watching their 3-year-old daughter chase butterflies through the wildflower meadow. Little Ayana Rose had her father's dark hair and her mother's green eyes, a perfect blend of 2 worlds that had found harmony in love. the settlement officially named Haven Valley but known to its residents simply as Home had grown to nearly 200 souls. What had begun as a desperate exodus had become a beacon of hope for outcasts and dreamers from across the frontier. Word of their success had spread far enough to attract visitors from as distant as California and the Oregon Territory. "Mama," Ayana Rose called in the mixture of English and Comanche that was her native tongue. "Look, pretty wings." Corinna smiled, remembering her own fascination with butterflies as a child, before the world had taught her to fear beauty instead of celebrate it. Here in Haven Valley, children grew up believing that differences made life more interesting rather than more dangerous. Ayana-Naalnish emerged from their cabin, now a comfortable log structure with glass windows and a stone fireplace, decorated with Comanche symbols and furnished with beautiful hand-woven textiles that represented the best of both cultures. At 38, he had grown into his role as one of the settlement's leaders, his natural wisdom enhanced by experience and the confidence that came from building something lasting. "The council meeting went well?" Corinna asked, noting the satisfaction in his expression. "Better than well," he replied, lifting their daughter into his arms. "The territorial governor has officially recognized Haven Valley as an incorporated town. We'll have our own post office, our own marshal, complete legal standing under territorial law." Corinna felt tears of joy spring to her eyes. Legal recognition meant safety for their community, protection under the very laws that had once threatened to tear them apart. It meant their children would grow up as full citizens rather than outcasts. "There's more," Ayana-Naalnish continued, his smile growing wider. "They want me to run for territorial representative. A Comanche man in the territorial legislature can. You imagine?" "I can imagine it perfectly," Corinna said, pride swelling in her chest. "You'll be the voice for all the people who never had one before." As if summoned by their conversation, riders appeared at the canyon entrance, the weekly mail delivery that had become one of the settlement's most anticipated events. The postal rider, a grizzled mountain man named Pete who had grown fond of their community, waved cheerfully as he distributed letters and packages. "Got something special today," Pete announced, handing Corinna an official-looking envelope. Came all the way from Washington, D.C. With trembling fingers, Corinna opened the letter and read its contents twice before the words fully registered. "It's from the Smithsonian Institution," she said in amazement. "They want to document our community as an example of successful cultural integration. They're sending ethnographies and photographers to study how we've built a functioning society from such diverse backgrounds." Ayana-Naalnish shook his head in wonder. From refugees to example for the nation. The spirits work in mysterious ways. That evening, as the entire community gathered for their weekly council meeting and social hour, Corinna reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them all to this moment. Around the fire sat faces representing dozens of backgrounds: Comanche and Cherokee, German and Irish, Chinese and Mexican, former slaves and former soldiers, all united by their shared commitment to building something better than what they'd left behind. Old Taya Nyali, now nearing 80 but still sharp as a blade, spoke first. "When we began this journey, many said we were fools to think such different people could live together in peace. Tonight, we prove that love is stronger than fear, that understanding is more powerful than hatred." Margaret O'Brien stood to report on the school's progress. "We now have 47 children in classes, all learning together, all teaching each other. The Cherokee children are helping the German ones learn English, while the German children teach mathematics to everyone. It's beautiful to witness." Carlos, the Mexican trader who had become their primary link to the outside world, announced that orders for Haven Valley goods had increased threefold over the past year. Our reputation for quality and fair dealing has spread throughout the territory. We're not just surviving, we're prospering. As the meeting wound down and families began to drift toward their homes, Corinna found herself standing with her husband and daughter at the exact spot where they had first looked down into the valley. The settlement spread below them like a constellation of warm lights, each window representing dreams realized and lives transformed. No regrets? Ayanan Alnish asked, echoing his question from years before. Corinna considered all she had gained and lost, all the pain that had led to this perfect moment. Jaramir's cruelty had nearly destroyed her, but it had also driven her toward her. True destiny. The woman who had been left to die under a mesquite tree had indeed perished, and from her suffering had emerged someone stronger, wiser, more complete than she had ever imagined possible. None, she said firmly, taking his free hand while their daughter dozed between them. Every sorrow led to this joy. Every ending became a beginning. And every sunrise here reminds me that love can transform anything, even the broken places. In our hearts, above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, bearing witness to a love that had bridged worlds and built something eternal from the ashes of despair. In Haven Valley, beneath the endless western sky, 3 generations of dreamers slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that home wasn't a place. It was the courage to love without limits and the wisdom to see that all people, regardless of their origins, yearned for the same simple things: acceptance, purpose, and a chance to write their own stories. The frontier girl who had been left to die had instead learned to truly live, and in doing so had helped create a new kind of frontier one, where the boundaries that mattered weren't marked by rivers or mountain ranges, but by the limitless horizons of the human heart.